So I'm Robert Emmett Hernan. I'm head of Bluestack Productions, the publisher of Irish Environment, an online magazine covering environmental matters on the island of Ireland. I'm very happy today to be here in Brussels with Ariel Brunner, who's head of EU policy, yes, at Birdlife Europe. Welcome.
Indeed.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Now, Ariel, could you give the audience a sense of what Birdlife Europe does, which is part of the network, what it does differently from the network members, like for instance Birdwatch in Ireland has its work. What do you do differently in the European level?
Birdlife International is a federation of national organizations. We have one partner organization per country, and they are all grassroots organizations dedicated to bird conservation and biodiversity conservation more in general. What we do in Europe, and particularly in the EU context, is first of all helping our partners coordinate their work across the continent so that we are all pushing in the same direction. Of course, every country has its own problems and its own solutions, but we are trying to make sure that we are offering global and continent-sized solutions. Beyond that, we help our partners interact with the EU, which is of course a very, very important player on the environmental scene. And that means helping partners negotiate common positions so that they all push in the same direction. Then we, in terms of the Birdlife Secretariat, the people here in Brussels, we represent the partners, particularly with bodies like the European Commission, where you have one European Commission, so you need actually someone to speak on behalf of the 28 partners in the 28 member states. We also help them with intelligence, information, strategies to enable partners to use the EU, to use EU legislation at national level. So for example, if we have a partner that is fighting against a damaging development in a Natura 2000 site, if they need to take a court action or make a complaint to the European Commission or things like that, we can provide them with the expertise about interpretation of the EU legislation, about how to use different legal tools, and we can also facilitate the exchange between partners. So there might be a partner in another country in Europe that has already fought a similar fight and learned lessons from it, or there might be a technical expertise or a legal expertise or a scientific expertise with one partner that can be useful for another partner.
Now, how many members are there? At least there's 28 members organizations, but in terms of the actual number of people who belong to Birdlife or any of its members?
The sum of the individual membership is over 2 million.
2 million, okay.
In the EU. We speak here on behalf of, in the case of the EU, 28 national partners. In the case of Europe and Central Asia, it's 43 national organizations, and globally it's over 100.
Where does funding come from for Birdlife Europe?
So the first thing to understand is that Birdlife Europe as a secretariat is a rather small organization. We are talking about 15 staff.
15?
Yeah, well, plus interns, plus a few consultants, but I mean, that's the sort of size of we are talking about. So it's a quite light structure because most of the work is done by the national partners. Including most of the work done in Brussels. We rely on the expertise of our people on the ground. And there, every partner has its own funding structure. They are all membership-based, but of course, some have a very big membership, others have a small one. Some work with companies, some don't, and they are all sort of sovereign in their own structure. In terms of the funding of the, let's say, European Division Secretariat, it's a mixed bag where a bit under a half is contributions from the national organizations. And the rest is a mix of funding from the European Commission, from various donors, charity foundations, certain corporate relations, and some donations, fundraising mechanisms. So it's quite spread out, but with a very, very big part that comes from the members. In many countries, governments do put forward funding to enable the participation of civil society, which I think is a really important part of our democratic machinery, because there's no point having a democratic game where everybody can participate, but some people have the possibility to pay for the ticket to come to the meeting, and other people need to hitchhike there and won't make it on time. So if you want to have a sort of an open discussion, you need to create the infrastructure for that discussion. Now, those infrastructures are not just supporting some of the costs of participating in the discussion, it's also making the discussion more transparent and more feasible, and in that the EU is quite good. Most EU debates are web streamed nowadays, so you can follow discussions in, for example, the European Parliament live on the web. The Commission is using more and more web-based consultations.
Now, Ariel, what's getting your attention at the moment?
Well, at the moment, I think a lot of our attention in the last couple of months have been taken by the new European Commission that has been installed under the presidency of Jean-Claude Juncker. And we have been very worried by the way this Commission has been set up and by the sort of, at least the rhetorics that have come out of it, where seems, at least superficially, that this Commission has a very, very strong deregulation agenda, and that the environmental policy is coming under rather sustained attack, and together with other organizations within the Green 10 umbrella of coordination of the environmental NGOs, we have reacted quite forcefully. And I think we have already achieved some changes, but certainly there is a very lively debate happening at the moment about basically the direction in which the EU needs to go. There is a very strong push from certain elements within the business sector, sort of the main cheerleaders of this anti-environmental attack are Business Europe, which are peddling a very ideological view of the environment, environmental legislation, environmental policy as an obstacle to growth, to economic activity, with growth being the miracle solution for the economic crisis, for the social crisis, for unemployment. So the logic is, we need jobs, jobs come from growth, growth comes from building stuff, and we cannot build stuff because we have all this horrible red tape and environmental legislation. We think this is completely wrong, and it's wrong all across. First of all, because environmental policy is about our survival as a society. So, in a sense, there's not even a point discussing about the economy if the life support system of that economy crumbles. It's about health of and well-being of citizens. If you die prematurely from cancer caused by pollution, you are not going to hold on to your job. So, this is a really very fundamental thing. The second thing we know is that the future of the European economy in terms of jobs and competitiveness is in moving into a new economy. It's about resource efficiency, it's about energy efficiency, it's about reducing the huge costs that we have for importing our energy and our raw material from outside Europe. It's by transforming all of our waste streams into resources that can, it's about the energy transformation that we need to bring forward in order to deal with climate change, which can create huge amounts of jobs. There's a lot that is wrong about this narrative, but this narrative has permeated the decision making of both of European governments, at least some governments, and unfortunately of the new Commission. Now, I think the fight for the heart and soul of the new Commission is still open, and there are rather contradictory signals. Certainly, in the initial setup of the Juncker Commission, the environment was completely annihilated. You know,
Mm-hmm.
The environment went from having a full commissioner to having half a commissioner. Same
Mm-hmm.
happened to climate change. None of the vice presidents, which are the sort of A-class commissioners, had any environment in their job description, and the mandates given to all the commissioners, including the Commissioner for Environment and Marine and Fisheries, were about deregulation, watering down, lowering emission, so on and so forth. Now, there has been a quite lively reaction, for example, from the European Parliament. Juncker has come back and he has integrated sustainable development in the portfolio of First Vice President Timmermans. For the moment, of the intentions of the new work plan of the Commission seems again to sort of repeat the same sort of rather backward-looking picture. But we know there are lively debates within the Commission. And there are discussions with the European Parliament, with member states. We've seen yesterday 11 member states writing to Juncker opposing the suggestion of dropping the proposals that the Commission has made under the outgoing Commission on new legislation on air quality
this is the air package
and waste.
Waste,
So we are seeing a quite
Some pushback.
broad mobilization. We've seen a lot of industries speaking up against those attempts, and this is very encouraging. I think that there's more and more voices out there that are speaking up and saying, this caricature of the environment as an obstacle to the economy is something that comes out from the dark ages of 1980s, and it does not belong in this century.
First attack like this you've seen, it seems within what I'm thinking of is 1980, of course, was in the States when we were faced with the Reagan attack, which was the very first concerted attack to undermine. He tried to undermine the EPA, so forth. It didn't work, but that was the first one.
I think attacks on environmental legislation are recurring, and for example, if we look at the biodiversity legislation, the attacks on the Birds and Habitats directives have been coming at sort of regular intervals. But I think this is by far the most virulent and concerted and high-level attack that we are seeing. From that point of view, I think it does seem. I'm very worried that we are seeing here a repeat of what has happened in the US. Finally, I think we are also risking throwing away the only or one of the few opportunities that Europe has to retain a leadership position in the world. Because Europe has still quite a lot of what they call soft power. Europe does not have a big army that goes around bombing people around the world, but Europe is a reference for a lot of people around the world. And there's no doubt that the things where Europe is offering a model to other people is around environmental protection. It's around how to give a decent living to its population. It's about peaceful conflict resolution and getting different countries and people and ethnic and religious groups to live in harmony together. Those are the things where Europe can be a beacon for the rest of the world, and when you go around the world, you see that people take notice. And when you go to the environment, every second time you go there, you bump into a delegation of Chinese or other people that come to learn from us how to do environmental legislation, how to do environmental policy, how to clean up their air, how to clean up their water. And that's, if you want a Europe that matters in the world, that's where you need to look.
Let me shift the gears a little bit because you've actually done there are some corporations out there that are actually fairly progressive.
Oh yeah.
And even in America, the largest energy producers now committed to 70% renewable energy and zero carbon by 2080, which is extraordinary. But I want to ask you about you're doing work with the cement companies.
So we work with a range of people. We certainly have indeed corporations with actually two big cement companies. We have a very good, very solid partnership with Heidelberg Cement, and we also have a working relationship and also at the global level, not just in Europe, with Cemex. And I think both of those companies in different ways are engaging very positively, mainly around the issue of the management of the gravel pits and the extraction sites. That's a very interesting case because those extraction sites can, of course, do rather significant damage to biodiversity. If you take a natural habitat and you physically dig it up, you know,
it's not good.
You can easily see how it can go wrong. But the interesting thing is that they, if done properly, it can create wonderful biodiversity habitats, and in many cases very rare and threatened biodiversity habitats, because you can mimic natural dynamics or the sort of pioneer habitats of shifting sand and vegetation that colonizes the initial stages, things that used to happen thanks, for example, to free-flowing river dynamics. On this continent there's hardly any free-flowing rivers anymore, so some of the most threatened habitats that we have are those early ecological successional habitats, which can be mimicked by sand and gravel pits. So as unlikely as it might seem, some extractive sites are in practice nature reserves, and you have very rare birds and toads and orchids that flourish in the middle of all this heavy machinery. So you can do things in a very different way, and we are working with those companies on the ground to develop those better way of doing things. And the interesting thing is that we have started now having very constructive dialogues with them also on the policy side, and they have started speaking up, because those responsible companies have, for example, incorporated things like the Natura 2000 network into their business plan. So today, before they go and dig somewhere, they first verify whether it's legally protected, what biodiversity is there, and then they make their choices. In certain places they don't dig, in certain places they dig in the right way. They make sure that their operation accommodates the habitats and the species. Of course, sometimes it's problematic, and sometimes we clash, and sometimes we criticize them, and sometimes we help them solve the problems. But they have understood that if you incorporate the thinking about biodiversity into your business plan, then it doesn't need to be an obstacle, because very often it's not even a real cost, because on the costs of running and that sort of operation,
huge.
Small tweaks to accommodate biodiversity are really a negligible cost. And on the other hand, the costs that you save by not having confrontation with environmental NGOs, by having better relationship with local communities, by making municipalities understand what you are doing, and so on, the time and the money you save by not having to go to court against people more than pays for any amount of good active conservation and science and monitoring that you would want to invest in it.
Now, how did that come about? Did you approach them, or did they approach you?
Well, I think it has grown over the years, often from conflicts, often from opposition to specific cases, and then it starts that someone does something and you tell them they shouldn't be doing it, and then
and someone listens. And someone's listening.
But if there are intelligent people on both sides, you move from the conflict to actually trying to understand each other, and then typically you realize that the people that damage biodiversity don't really want to damage it. It's not that the business model is to destroy biodiversity. They understand that environmentalists are not there just to stop them doing business, but that we do care about things that actually they should also be caring about. And then you start thinking pragmatically.
We're also working with energy grid operators to for best practices and as I understand it, to help them work with public acceptance of the changes to the grid. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been in recent years. We've been part of this really exciting experience called the Renewable Grid Initiative, which is an alliance that has brought together some of the biggest grid operators in Europe. So those are the companies that manage the electric distribution grid, and environmental NGOs that have been sitting together, and basically we've created an alliance around a few basic points. So the first point is the understanding that we need to transition to a climate-friendly, low-carbon, sustainable energy system. And that's why it's called the Renewable Grid Initiative, because at its heart, of course, the biggest part of the solution is in saving energy, but the other part of the solution is producing energy from renewable sources, renewable and environmentally benign technologies. Now, renewable energy needs an upgrade of the electricity grid, because a lot of renewable energy, particularly the best ones, wind and solar, are intermittent.
Right.
And that means that you have a problem. You cannot switch on the sun or the wind when you need it. And the solution for it is better interconnections, so that you can play on the fact that when the wind blows in one part of the continent and doesn't at the other part of the continent, you can transport electricity from one part to the other. Smart grids, so the idea that you can not only react to demand, but you can have a better matching of and you can ramp up demand when the supply is there, rather than the traditional way, which was a one way, demand just comes and then you start burning stuff to try and catch up with it. Energy storage, there's all sorts of things that need to be done, but a certain amount of new power lines, either new power lines or the upgrade of existing power lines is needed. So that's one sort of thing that is a fact. Now, the second fact is that grid, particularly grid expansion, creates environmental impacts. And other impacts. You have the impacts go from the physical destruction of habitats to collisions of birds, to including less obvious impacts such as aesthetic impacts, and in general it's the sort of things that people don't like. People don't like seeing a new power line built above their house. Now, having an agreement about those things, that's the basis for working together and saying, okay, let's find ways to build what we need to build, but build it in an intelligent way, in a low impact way, and build it together with the local populations that are affected by it. And that has brought a lot of work on developing best practice on things like environmental impact assessment, on biodiversity impacts, on public consultation, on engaging local communities, and I think it has brought a revolution in the way some of those companies work, because again, traditionally those things were driven by the engineering side. I need to bring my electricity from point A to point B, there it goes. Then there are people in the way, bats, birds, well, too bad for them, and then they sue you, and then you pay a bigger lawyer than they can afford, and you try to ram it through. And I think over the years people have seen that this is just a stupid way of doing it. And in most cases, if you honestly take on board the real concerns, so you don't see just as, oh, it's all NIMBY, it's all, but you actually, when you do it properly, you ask what are going to be the impacts, what are going to be the impacts on nature, what are going to be the impacts on people, who do I need to consult, you take the criticism early on.
Mhm.
Ideally, you don't even wait for those to be criticism, but you go to people saying, hey, we have a problem to solve there. Those are options about how to solve them. You know, what do you think about it?
Mhm.
Then you end up with projects which are better projects.
Mhm.
They are a lot less harmful for the environment. In some cases, they might even be beneficial because you might end in certain cases dismantling badly built infrastructures and
Mhm.
replacing them with better built infrastructures. Then you get actually a net gain. But in other cases, you end up still with an impact. But at least you can contain that impact.
Mhm.
You end up with faster development actually, because working with people rather than against people at the end of the day saves you time and money.
Mhm.
And you end up with more social acceptance because ultimately it is not true that people are, you know, anti-development or anti-everything or, you know,
Mhm.
NIMBY. Some people are, it does exist, but overall there are a lot of very rational people out there that
Mhm.
have rational concerns, and if you listen to their concerns and honestly try to solve them, then people would play ball.
Mhm.
And again, we have seen now a move where this dialogue has moved from the sort of best practice on the ground also into the policy realm on how we design things like the, you know, new generation of European energy policies
Mhm.
in a way that incorporates this, because we still see here in Brussels, particularly from some parts of the energy community, certain dark corners of DG Energy,
Mhm.
we see a sort of 1950s approach to things of saying, oh, we need to, you know, do the energy revolution, we need big infrastructures,
Mhm.
need to speed up, take away the special powers, send
Yeah.
in the commissar that can, you know, ram it through, and really this is 20th century of doing infrastructures.
Yeah.
21st century of doing infrastructure is working with communities, working on the basis of sound science,
Mhm.
and grabbing the bull by the horns and admitting from day one that when you go out and do things, you will have impact. Some of those impacts will be problematic,
Mhm.
and you need to solve them. And
Mhm.
if you start solving them, you know, if solving those problems goes into the spec that you give your engineers,
Yeah.
then, you know, engineers are pretty bright people and they will come up with bright solutions.
Yeah.
Retrofitting the solutions after you've done the damage is way more complicated than building them in from day one.
It's very hard to end a conversation on environmental matters on a positive note, but I think we just did, and I think we should. Ariel, thanks for talking with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.